Hello and a very warm, quiet welcome to Heist Stories for Sleep. I am so glad you are here, ready to let the day fall away. There is nothing you need to do now but listen, to breathe, and to let your mind drift. This is a safe and quiet place. There are no jumps here, no gore, just a calm, unhurried story to help guide you toward rest. Tonight we are going to travel back in time, to a city of endless quiet corners and gentle falling rain. We are going to Tokyo in the year 1968. Imagine the city then, not as a bustling, futuristic metropolis, but as a place of low wooden buildings, tiled roofs, and narrow streets. It is a December evening, and a fine, persistent rain is falling, the kind of rain that does not demand attention, but simply mists the air, polishing the asphalt streets until they gleam like dark rivers under the soft, yellow glow of the streetlights. The city is breathing softly, its millions of residents settling in for the night, the sounds of traffic fading into a distant, rhythmic hum, like the city's own gentle heartbeat. It is in this quiet, sleeping city that our story unfolds. So find a comfortable position. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing become slow and deep. We are in no rush at all. We have all the time in the world. Let the soft rain of 1960s Tokyo be the soundtrack to our story. The story of the empty strongbox. In the western part of the vast Tokyo metropolis lies a district called Fuchu. In 1968, Fuchu was a place where the city began to blend with the countryside. It was a landscape of modest two-story homes with neat little gardens, of small family-owned shops with sliding wooden doors, and the ever-present tangle of telephone wires sketching dark lines against a pearly grey sky. It was a place of routine, a place where life moved with the steady, predictable rhythm of the seasons. The air in Fuchu on a rainy day smelled of wet earth, of diesel from the occasional passing truck, and of savory broth simmering in the kitchens of small noodle shops. The sounds were gentle too, the metallic rattle of a bicycle over a loose manhole cover, the distant mournful whistle of a train heading toward the city center, and the soft, steady shushing of the rain on paper umbrellas. It was an ordinary place, filled with ordinary lives, and in this ordinary place lived a young man. We will call him the planner. He was not remarkable to look at. He was of average height and build, with dark hair and a quiet, thoughtful expression. If you passed him on the street, you would likely not remember him a moment later. He moved through the world with a kind of invisibility, a stillness that made him blend into the background. He lived in a small, simple room on the second floor of a modest apartment building. The room was tidy, almost bare. There was a sleeping mat, a low table, a small bookshelf, and a single window that looked out over a quiet residential street. The planner was a creature of immense patience. His defining quality was his ability to watch, to wait, and to understand the deep underlying rhythms of the world around him. He was a student of patterns. He would sit by his window for hours, a cup of lukewarm tea resting between his hands, and simply observe. He watched the mailman make his daily rounds, noting the slight change in his pace on hot days versus cold ones. He watched the neighborhood cats, learning their territories and their preferred napping spots. He watched the way the leaves on the ginkgo tree outside his window turned from green to brilliant yellow, and how they fell, one by one, in the crisp autumn air. He was not alone in his quiet endeavor, though he was its heart and its mind. There were a few others just as quiet and unassuming as he was. There was a young man we might call the driver. He had a steady hand and a calm demeanor, a man who understood engines and roads not through technical manuals, but through feeling and sound. He knew the labyrinth of Tokyo's streets like the lines on his own palm. He knew which roads were busy at which hours, which ones were prone to fog, and which ones offered a quiet, anonymous passage from one part of the city to another. And there was another, a helper, who was good with his hands, able to make things and modify them with a careful, patient touch. He was a quiet man who spoke little, preferring to let his work speak for him. These men were not flashy criminals or bold adventurers. They were more like craftsmen, preparing for a delicate and complex project. Their meetings were never in smoky back rooms. They met in quiet parks, on benches overlooking duck ponds, or in the back of small empty coffee shops, nursing a single cup for an hour. Their conversations were brief, spoken in low tones, filled with long, comfortable silences. They were not plotting so much as they were weaving, slowly and carefully, threading together a plan from strands of observation and patience. The planner was the center of this small, quiet universe. On the floor of his small room, spread out like a great tapestry, were maps. Not just one map, but dozens of them. There were road maps, topographical maps, and even hand-drawn maps that he had made himself. He had charted the subtle rise and fall of the land, the curves of the roads, the locations of traffic lights, and the quiet, forgotten lanes that crisscrossed the district. These maps were his canvas, and upon them he traced a single, recurring line, the daily journey of a particular grey car, a bank car. This car was also a creature of habit. It was a sturdy, unremarkable vehicle, tasked with a very important job, carrying money. Specifically, it was carrying the year-end bonuses for the thousands of employees at a large Toshiba factory in Fuchu. It was a task it performed with dependable regularity. The planner had watched this car for a very long time. He knew its sound, the particular low rumble of its engine. He knew the faces of the 4 guards who rode inside, their expressions usually bored and placid as they made a journey they had made many times before. He knew that the car followed the same route every time it made this special delivery. It left the bank at a predictable time. It traveled along the same sequence of streets. It passed the same landmarks. Its journey was a line drawn and redrawn on the city, a ritual as fixed as the rising of the sun. The car and its contents were protected by layers of precaution, of course. There were locks and schedules and trusted procedures, but the planner saw that the greatest protection was the routine itself. The very predictability of the car's journey was its shield. Everyone believed it was safe because it had always been safe. No one expected the rhythm to break. The planner, however, was not interested in breaking the rhythm with force. He was looking for a way to subtly, quietly step into the song, alter a single note, and then step out again, leaving behind only silence. And so his life became a long, slow study. He did not rush. He did not grow impatient. He simply watched, and he learned. He learned the song of the grey car by heart. Sleepy notes. The crime is often remembered as a masterpiece of planning by a single genius. However, most investigators and historians believe there must have been at least a small group involved. The sheer number of tasks, from preparing vehicles to gathering materials, would have been very difficult for one person to manage alone. The seasons turned. The humid, heavy heat of a Tokyo summer gave way to the crisp, cool air of autumn. The leaves of the maple and ginkgo trees that lined the streets of Fuchu turned to fiery reds and brilliant golds. The planner continued his quiet observations, his patience stretching like a long, unbroken thread. His plan was not a blueprint with sharp lines and angles. It was more like a seed he had planted, which he was now watering with time and attention, allowing it to grow slowly and naturally. He focused on the small details, the human elements. He noticed that one of the guards in the bank car always bought a can of sweet coffee from a vending machine just before their journey began. He saw how the driver would tap his fingers on the steering wheel in time with some unheard music. He observed the way the rain would bead on the car's windshield and how the wipers would move back and forth in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. These were not clues, they were textures, the small human realities that made the routine feel so solid, so unchangeable. The planner's own routine was just as quiet and steady. He would wake before dawn when the sky was a soft, deep indigo and the city was at its most still. He would make his tea, sit at his low table, and look at his maps. He would trace the route with his finger, over and over, until the journey was as familiar to him as the path from his own front door to the corner market. He was not just memorizing a route. He was trying to feel its pulse, to understand its energy. During the day, he would sometimes take long, aimless walks through Fuchu and the neighboring areas. He would walk along the Tamagawa River, watching the slow, brown water flow toward the sea. He would explore the narrow side streets, the forgotten alleys that ran behind shops and homes. He was absorbing the landscape, making it a part of him. He found a quiet, secluded spot, a small clearing in a patch of woods not far from a country road. It was a place that felt forgotten, a place where one could be unseen. The driver and the helper continued their own quiet preparations. The driver spent time with a second car, an ordinary passenger sedan. He came to know its every quirk, the sound of its engine, the feel of its brakes. He kept it clean and well-maintained, but not so clean as to draw attention. It was perfectly, beautifully anonymous. The helper, meanwhile, worked with a motorcycle. He was a meticulous craftsman. He acquired an old motorcycle and began to patiently transform it. He painted it, altered its shape with simple additions, and made it look like something it was not. It was a slow, careful process, done in a small, cluttered garage, where the only sounds were the soft scrape of sandpaper on metal and the quiet hum of a single bare light bulb. One evening the three of them met. It was a cold night, and their breath misted in the air. They stood under the dim light of a street lamp near a quiet railway crossing. The planner unrolled a small, hand-drawn map. His voice was low, calm. "The timing is what matters most," he said, his finger tracing a spot on the paper. "Not too early, not too late." The driver nodded, his eyes fixed on the map. "The rain will help. It keeps people inside. The roads will be quiet." "And after?" the helper asked, his voice barely a whisper. The planner looked up from the map, his gaze calm and steady. "After, we simply fade. We become part of the city again, like raindrops falling into the river." There was no excitement in their voices, no tension. It was the conversation of men discussing a familiar task, like fishermen planning their morning route. They were not focused on the prize, they were focused on the process, on the quiet, careful execution of each small step. Their confidence came not from arrogance, but from the depth of their preparation. They had rehearsed this in their minds 1,000 times. They had walked the paths, timed the lights, and felt the rhythm of the city. The planner's plan relied on psychology, not on force. It was built on the universal human tendency to trust a uniform, to obey an instruction from someone who looks like they are in charge, especially when a hint of danger is introduced. He was not planning to break into the car. He was planning to have it handed to him. He would create a small temporary world, a brief moment of theater on a rainy road, and in that moment the rules of the ordinary world would be suspended. As the date they had chosen drew closer, a deep sense of calm settled over the planner. He had done all the watching, all the thinking, all the planning he could do. Now all that was left was to wait for the right moment, for the rain to fall, and for the grey car to begin its final familiar journey. He spent the last few days in his small room, reading. He read old stories, poetry, and philosophy. He was not nervous, he was simply ready. He was like a painter who had mixed all his colors and prepared his canvas. Now all that remained was to make the first gentle stroke. He trusted the process. He trusted the patience that had brought him to this point, and he trusted the quiet, sleeping city to hold his secret. Sleepy notes. Much has been written about the incredible foresight of the plan. The perpetrator left behind nearly 120 pieces of evidence at the various scenes, but all of them seemed to be common, everyday items, deliberately chosen to mislead the police and send them down countless false trails. This suggests a level of psychological planning that was truly remarkable for its time. The morning of December 10, 1968, arrived with a hush. The sky over Tokyo was a uniform sheet of grey, heavy with unspoken rain. A cold, damp wind whispered through the narrow streets, carrying the scent of wet pavement and distant winter. It was the kind of morning that encourages people to stay indoors, to linger over a warm cup of tea and watch the world through a rain-streaked window. For the planner, it was the perfect morning. He woke long before dawn, as was his habit. The world outside his window was still dark, save for the soft, hazy glow of the streetlights. He performed his morning ritual with a slow, deliberate calm. He heated water for tea, listening to the gentle hiss of the flame. He sat at his low table and sipped the warm liquid, feeling its heat spread through him. There was no sense of hurry, no frantic energy. It was a day like any other, yet it was entirely different. It was the day the seed of his plan would finally break through the soil. He dressed carefully, not in anything special, but in simple, dark clothing that would not attract attention. He moved around his small room with a practiced economy of motion, each action flowing smoothly into the next. He gathered the few items he would need, his hands steady, his mind clear and quiet. When he was ready, he stepped out of his apartment and into the cold, damp air. The rain had begun to fall, a fine, steady drizzle that was more mist than water. It settled on his hair and shoulders, but he barely noticed. He walked to the small garage where the helper had worked his quiet magic. Inside, the motorcycle sat waiting. In the dim light, it looked official, imposing. It was painted white, just like the motorcycles used by the traffic police. It had been fitted with panniers and a small windscreen. It was a clever illusion, crafted not to be perfect, but to be convincing enough at a glance on a grey and rainy day. The planner ran his hand over the cold metal of the fuel tank. It felt solid, real. He wheeled the motorcycle out into the alley and started the engine. The sound was a low, steady thrum, a respectable noise that did not shout for attention. He swung his leg over the seat, the worn leather cool beneath him. He took a few deep, slow breaths, the cold air filling his lungs. He felt a profound sense of stillness, a feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be, at exactly the right moment. He was no longer just the planner. He was becoming a character in his own quiet play. He pulled out into the street, joining the sparse early morning traffic. The wet road hissed beneath his tires. Raindrops clung to his visor, blurring the yellow headlights of the oncoming cars into soft, glowing orbs. He rode with a confident, easy grace, moving with the flow of the city. He was just another rider on a wet Tuesday morning, a ghost in the machine. His route took him toward the chosen spot, a stretch of road adjacent to the high walls of the Fuchu prison. It was a carefully selected stage. The high wall on one side meant there were no houses, no windows, no curious onlookers. It was a place of transit, a road people used to get from one place to another, not a place where they lingered. He had studied this road for months. He knew its every crack and dip. He arrived early and parked the motorcycle on the side of the road, in a small, predetermined spot. He got off the bike and waited, a solitary figure standing in the rain. He was patient. He did not pace or fidget. He simply stood, listening to the sound of the rain and the soft sigh of the wind. He watched as the minutes ticked by, each one a slow, steady heartbeat. The world seemed to be holding its breath. Then, in the distance, he heard it. A low, familiar rumble. The sound he had committed to memory. The sound of the grey bank car. He watched as it approached, its headlights cutting through the grey mist. It moved at a steady, unhurried pace. It was a picture of routine, of absolute normality. The 4 guards inside were likely thinking of lunch or of the warmth of their homes at the end of the day. They were inside their metal box, moving through a world they thought they understood. As the car drew near, the planner swung his leg back over the motorcycle. He kicked it to life again. With a smooth twist of the throttle, he pulled out onto the road directly in the path of the approaching vehicle. He raised a single, gloved hand, a simple, universally understood gesture. Stop. The grey car slowed, its brakes squeaking softly in the damp air. It came to a complete halt a few feet away from the motorcycle. The driver's window rolled down, and a uniformed guard leaned out, his face a mixture of curiosity and slight annoyance. "What is it?" the guard asked. "Is there a problem?" The planner, his face partially obscured by his helmet and the rain, adopted a tone of calm authority. His voice was firm, but not aggressive. "There has been a report," the planner said, his voice clear and even above the sound of the idling engines and the falling rain. "There is a warning about this vehicle. Your head office has been informed. We have reason to believe there may be an explosive device planted underneath." The words hung in the cold, wet air. An explosive device. The simple, terrifying phrase changed everything. The guards exchanged nervous glances. The world of routine had been shattered. "We need everyone to get out of the car immediately," the planner continued, his tone urgent but controlled. "Please step away from the vehicle, for your own safety." There was a moment of hesitation. The guards were trained, they had procedures, but this was something entirely outside their experience. A police officer on a motorcycle, a warning of a bomb. Fear is a powerful persuader. The calm authority in the planner's voice was more convincing than any weapon. The car doors opened. One by one, the 4 guards climbed out, their faces pale with shock and concern. They moved away from the car, their training telling them to create distance from a potential threat. They stood in a small, huddled group on the side of the road, watching, waiting. The rain continued to fall, washing the color from the world. The planner dismounted from his motorcycle. He moved toward the grey car with a sense of purpose. He got down on his hands and knees and peered under the chassis. It was a piece of theatre, and he played his part perfectly. He stayed under the car for a few moments, then quickly scrambled back out. As he did, a thick, acrid smoke began to pour out from underneath the car. It was dense and grey, billowing out in thick clouds, smelling of sulphur and fire. With the smoke came a bright, intense red light, a flickering glow that illuminated the wet road. It was just a simple road flare, a smoke pot, but in that moment of high tension, it was terrifyingly convincing. "It's going to explode," the planner shouted, his voice filled with manufactured panic. "Get back! Run!" That was all it took. The last remnants of the guards' composure vanished. They turned and ran, scrambling for cover behind a line of trees, their only thought to escape the imminent explosion that they were sure was coming. They did not look back. The planner watched them go. He waited for a beat, a perfect silent moment as the smoke swirled around him. The road was empty. The world was still. Then, with no hurry at all, he walked to the driver's side of the grey bank car. The keys were still in the ignition. He climbed into the driver's seat, the engine still humming its low, steady song. He put the car in gear. He did not speed away. He did not screech the tires. He simply pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly onto the empty road, and drove away, disappearing into the grey, rainy morning. Behind him, the smoke from the flare slowly thinned, and the red light flickered and died, leaving only the 4 guards standing in the rain, next to an empty space on the road where their secure world used to be. The grey car moved through the wet streets of Fuchu, just another vehicle in the morning mist. Inside, the planner was an island of calm. His heart was not racing. His hands were steady on the wheel. He drove with a quiet focus, following a route he knew by heart, a path he had traced on his maps 1,000 times. He passed other cars, buses, and people walking under umbrellas. No one gave him a second glance. He was invisible again, hidden in plain sight. His journey was not long. He drove for only a few minutes, turning onto a series of smaller, quieter residential streets. The houses here were silent, their occupants at work or school or still inside, away from the rain. He finally turned onto a narrow, unpaved lane that led to the secluded spot he had found months before, the small, forgotten clearing in the woods. He pulled the grey car in among the trees, where it was shielded from view from the main road. The engine idled for a moment longer, then he turned the key and the low rumble fell silent. The only sounds now were the gentle dripping of rain from the tree branches and the distant hum of the city. He got out of the car. Waiting for him there, as planned, was the driver, standing beside the anonymous sedan. The driver gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. No words were needed. Together they began the work. They opened the back of the grey bank car. Inside were the metal cases, the strongboxes. They were heavy, solid, and locked. The planner and the driver worked in a smooth, efficient rhythm, their movements synchronized by long preparation. They lifted each case out of the bank car and carefully placed it in the trunk and back seat of the sedan. The work was methodical, unhurried. It was not the frantic transfer of a heist, but the careful loading of cargo. They were simply moving boxes from one vehicle to another. Sleepy notes. The metal cases used to transport the money were duralumin, a strong but lightweight aluminum alloy. There were 3 of them, and together they weighed over 160 kilograms, or about 350 pounds. This detail further supports the theory that the main perpetrator likely had at least one accomplice to help with the transfer. When the last case was loaded, they closed the trunk of the sedan. The driver got into the driver's seat. The planner walked back to the grey bank car and the abandoned motorcycle. He did not linger. He had a few final small tasks to complete, a few last threads to weave into his creation of confusion. He left the car and the motorcycle there, nestled among the trees, like strange metal animals sleeping in the woods. He left other things too, small, ordinary objects, carefully chosen to tell a false story, to send the inevitable investigation down winding, fruitless paths. Then he simply walked away. He walked down the muddy lane back to the paved road and melted back into the fabric of the city. A short while later, the driver started the engine of the sedan. The car, now heavy with its secret cargo, pulled out of the woods and onto the street, joining the flow of traffic. Just another car on a rainy day, its extraordinary contents completely hidden by its ordinary appearance. The exit was as quiet as the approach. There was no chase, no drama, just a slow, gentle dissolving back into the vast, anonymous ocean of Tokyo. Meanwhile, back on the road by the prison wall, confusion was slowly giving way to realization. The 4 bank guards, having taken cover, waited for an explosion that never came. The minutes stretched on. The smoke dissipated. The silence became heavy, questioning. Cautiously they crept back to the road, back. The motorcycle was still there, lying on its side. But the car, their car with its precious cargo, was gone. The reality of the situation dawned on them, not in a sudden crash, but in a slow, sickening wave. They had been tricked. It was a theft of stunning simplicity and audacity. The initial reports to the police were confused, almost unbelievable. There was no violence, no broken locks, no signs of a struggle. Just a man on a motorcycle, a bit of smoke, and a vanishing car. The investigation began with a quiet, methodical pace. Police officers in raincoats arrived at the scene. They cordoned off the area. They looked at the abandoned motorcycle. They took notes. They spoke to the 4 guards, whose story sounded more like a scene from a movie than a real event. The search for the missing bank car began. It wasn't long before it was found, tucked away in the clearing in the woods just as the planner had left it. The doors were unlocked. The interior was empty. The initial discovery of the abandoned car and motorcycle sparked a flurry of activity. Forensics teams arrived, dusting for fingerprints, searching for fibers, for any small trace left behind by the perpetrator. But the planner had been meticulous. The rain had washed away any potential footprints. The objects he had left behind, a cookie tin, a magazine, a smoke pot, were all common, mass-produced items, impossible to trace to a single individual. It was as if a ghost had been there. The investigation grew into one of the largest in Japanese history. A staggering number of police officers were assigned to the case. They fanned out across Fuchu and beyond, interviewing thousands of people, following up on every possible lead. They created wanted posters with a composite sketch of the officer, a face that was generic enough to look like countless young men in Tokyo. The posters were everywhere, in train stations, on public notice boards, in shop windows. The face of the ghost was now looking out at the entire city. The police were patient and thorough. They followed a mountain of leads. They investigated every known criminal group. They looked into disgruntled employees, anyone with a grudge or a sudden need for money. They chased down tips from the public, some helpful, most not. The investigation was like a great slow-moving net being dragged across the city, hoping to catch something. But the planner had designed a plan that was not about brute force or intricate technology. It was about slipping through the holes in the net. The police found the second car, the sedan used to transport the money, abandoned in another location. Like the others, it had been carefully wiped clean of any useful evidence. The metal strongboxes themselves were also eventually found, discarded and empty. The planner had not needed to be a master safecracker. He had simply taken them to a quiet place and opened them at his leisure. The investigation became a national obsession. The newspapers were filled with stories about the 300 million yen robbery. People talked about it in coffee shops and on commuter trains. The audacity and brilliance of the crime captured the public imagination. The perpetrator became a kind of folk hero, an invisible genius who had outsmarted the entire system without hurting a single person. He was a phantom, known only by his cleverness. The detectives on the case were diligent, spending years of their lives chasing shadows. They compiled a list of suspects that grew into the thousands. They followed trails that led them to the far corners of Japan, but every lead eventually went cold. Every path ended in a question mark. The planner had created a perfect puzzle, and he had not left a key. The investigation was a vast and comprehensive effort, but it was searching for a man who had left no shadow, no echo, no trace of his existence. He had simply performed his quiet work and then vanished, completely and utterly. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into years. The seasons continued their relentless, gentle cycle in Tokyo. The snows of winter melted to reveal the first green shoots of spring. The cherry blossoms bloomed in a riot of pink and white, then scattered like confetti in the warm breeze. Summer brought its heavy heat and the drone of cicadas, and autumn painted the city in shades of gold and crimson once more. And with each passing season, the trail of the 300 million yen grew colder. The investigation continued, but its energy slowly faded. The massive task force was gradually downsized. The detectives grew older. Some retired, carrying the frustration of the unsolved case with them like a heavy stone. The wanted posters, once crisp and new, became faded and tattered by the sun and rain, the ghost's face peeling away from the walls and telephone poles. The story of the empty Strongbox began to transform. It moved from the front pages of the newspapers to the history books. It became less of an active police case and more of a modern legend, a story told and retold, each telling adding a new layer of myth. The money, the nearly 300 million yen, was never recovered. Not a single yen ever resurfaced in a way that could be traced back to the crime. It was as if it had simply evaporated, absorbed into the vast economic ocean of the country without a ripple. This was perhaps the most remarkable part of the entire affair. A fortune that, large, spent or invested, should have left a trace. But it never did. It suggested a level of discipline and patience that extended far beyond the planning and execution of the event itself. And what of the people involved? The planner, the driver, the helper, they were never identified. They succeeded in their final, most important task. They faded back into the city. They became raindrops in the river. It is possible the planner lived out his days as an ordinary citizen. Perhaps he became a quiet, unassuming salaryman, a shopkeeper, or a librarian. Perhaps he is an old man now sitting on a park bench feeding pigeons with a secret locked away behind kind, placid eyes. He may walk the very streets where he once watched the grey car, a ghost revisiting the scene of his masterpiece, completely invisible to the world. For the 4 bank guards, life eventually returned to a different kind of normal. The event became a defining moment in their lives, a strange, surreal memory they would carry forever. They were questioned endlessly, of course, but were quickly cleared of any involvement. They were simply ordinary men who, for a few minutes on a rainy Tuesday morning, had stepped into an extraordinary story. In 1975, 7 years after the event, the statute of limitations for the robbery expired. This meant that even if the perpetrator were to be identified, he could no longer be criminally prosecuted for the theft. The day the statute expired was a major news event in Japan. It was a formal legal acknowledgement that the ghost had won. The case was officially closed, unsolved. A few years after that, in 1988, the civil liability also expired, meaning the perpetrator could not be sued for the money. The story was now completely and irrevocably a part of history. The book was closed. The puzzle was left for eternity without a solution. Over the decades, many people have claimed to be the mastermind. Books have been written, theories have been spun, but none have ever been substantiated. The case remains one of Japan's most famous unsolved mysteries, a perfect crime that exists not as a story of violence or greed, but as a testament to meticulous planning, psychological cunning, and an almost supernatural level of patience. The story reminds us that sometimes the greatest systems and safeguards can be bypassed not by force, but by a quiet understanding of human nature. The planner did not defeat the locks or the alarms or the armored walls of the car. He defeated the routine. He used the predictability of the system against itself. He introduced a single, unexpected variable, a man in a uniform with a calm, authoritative voice, and the entire structure collapsed for just long enough for him to slip through, and so the empty Strongbox of Fuchu remains empty. The secret of who took the money and how they managed to disappear so completely is a secret the city of Tokyo still holds. It is a quiet whisper in the rain, a mystery that has settled into the very fabric of the place, as much a part of its character as the ancient temples and the gleaming skyscrapers. The ghost was never caught. The story was never finished. And perhaps that is why it endures. It is a perfect unsolved riddle, resting peacefully in the heart of a sleeping city. Sleepy notes. One of the most famous suspects was the son of a police officer, who bore a resemblance to the composite sketch and died shortly after the robbery. However, he was officially cleared. The case has spawned countless books, films, and television dramas in Japan, each offering a new theory. But the true identity of the person or people responsible remains a complete mystery. And now our story comes to a close. Let your mind drift away from the details, from the maps and the rainy roads of 1968. Let the story become a soft, distant echo. Come back to the feeling of the city at rest. Imagine Tokyo tonight, so many years later. The city is much larger now, a galaxy of light stretching to the horizon, but the rain still falls. It falls on the gleaming glass towers, on the ancient temple roofs in quiet neighborhoods, and on the quiet waters of the Tamagawa River. It is the same rain, washing the city clean, hushing the world into a state of peace. The city sleeps. The millions of individual stories, the countless dreams and worries of its inhabitants, all merge into a single, collective sigh. The trains have stopped running for the night. The last of the late-night noodle shops have closed their doors. There is a deep and profound stillness that settles over the metropolis in the hours before dawn. The mystery of the empty Strongbox is just one of countless stories held within the city's heart. A quiet memory that causes no more trouble. It rests now peacefully. The puzzle is complete in its incompleteness, and that is perfectly okay. Some stories are not meant to have a final answer. They are meant to be held as a gentle wonder, a quiet question mark that invites us not to solve, but simply to be still. So let any remaining thoughts drift away like clouds in the night sky. There is nothing left to figure out, nothing left to do. The only thing that matters now is your rest. Feel the weight of your body, comfortable and supported. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your own breathing, a quiet, steady rhythm, like the soft rain falling on a tiled roof in Fuchu. You are safe, you are comfortable, and it is time to sleep. Thank you for joining me here tonight on Heist Stories for Sleep. I hope this quiet tale has brought you a sense of calm and tranquility. If you feel inclined, I would love for you to leave a gentle comment, letting me know where in the world you are listening from tonight. It is always a quiet joy to know where our stories are traveling. But for now, just let go. Let the story fade and allow the deep, peaceful quiet to envelop you. May your sleep be deep and your dreams be sweet. Good night.